Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is Tracy Murda on behalf of Richard Jacobs here at Future Tech Podcast. Today, I have a very exciting guest to share with you all, the CEO of Blockchain, the world's leading Bitcoin software company. Nicolas, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I know you're busy and you're always on the road from what I can see and tell, so we'll just jump right in. I just wanted to talk about basically, there's obviously always a lot going on in the cryptocurrency world, but I wanted to sort of kind of rehash some of the basics and why we should all be looking to the Bitcoin blockchain and things like that to, for our financial futures versus some of the other options. So why don't we get started with, tell me a little bit about how you got involved, first of all, in the cryptocurrency business, because I know that's a pretty interesting story.
Okay, sure. Well, I think maybe I'll start with a little bit on the story and then also talk more broadly about the problem that basically everyone in our industry is trying to work toward and fixing. So my name is Nicolas Cary. I'm one of the co-founders of a firm called Blockchain, and it frequently gets confused with the core innovation that everyone's really excited about. But we've been actually doing this for a few years now. So we founded the firm in 2011, and we built a website called blockchain.info. And what happened was a lot of early community members that were really interested in the digital currency Bitcoin wanted a place where they could look at the ledger and keep track of what was going on. And so we built a whole bunch of tools that made it easy to log into a website and basically study transaction histories, find out what the price of Bitcoin was doing, and then we built a lot of other things too. And so we were really responding to the needs of an early and very technical community. And then a lot of other people started paying attention to what was happening. So the story of Bitcoin is pretty neat. Basically, in 2008, a developer wrote a white paper talking about a solution to a problem she thinks that they had discovered, which was using a distributed network to basically keep track of a record-keeping system for who owns what. And it was a pretty novel idea, and on January 3rd, 2009, the network was released as an open-source software project. And the first transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain were conducted between a few really genius and really brilliant cryptographers that spent the next couple of years volunteering their time to make the network more robust and to make sure that it could grow. And so in the early days, basically the only people that were kind of interested in these things were cryptographers and computer scientists and people with degrees in distributed computing. But then some other people started to take a keen interest in it as well. So there's a day that's celebrated in Bitcoin land, but it's International Pizza Day. And it's kind of a funny story because it was the first time that a market price was set for the digital currency Bitcoin. And that's when someone sold 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. And so in our industry, every May, everyone orders pizzas for all their teams, and it's kind of a fun historic day. But those pizzas are now the most expensive pizzas ever. They're worth over $12 million US, which is kind of wild if you think about it. So anyway, we covered a lot of ground quickly. In 2010, 2011, some of the early marketplaces were formed once a price was set for Bitcoin. And an interesting thing that comes up quite frequently is people are always asking me, well, why does a digital currency like Bitcoin have value? And it really strikes at the core of what, why does anything have value? Why does money something that everyone's always trying to accumulate more of, and where does value come from? And so, there are a lot of different points of view on this, but I think generally speaking, humans attribute value to things that satisfy 2 real conditions. One is whether or not that thing is useful, and then whether or not that thing is scarce. So things that have utility and are scarce tend to demand a market price. So if you think about things that we need to buy, if there was an unlimited supply of them, well, we wouldn't really need to buy them because we could get them from everywhere. And so things that are scarce and useful have value. And what happened in 2008 and 2009 when the blockchain was launched is an experiment in creating digital scarcity. And it works. And that's the real beauty of this whole project, is that now we have digitally precious resources. And Bitcoin is the first example of one of these, and it's now worth over $20 billion as a network. So I'm kind of going all over the place, but it's kind of helpful, I think, to have a little bit of that perspective, and then talk a little bit also about why this has so many people excited. So if you think about this, while the rest of the world has evolved and modernized, you think about telecommunications, media. We used to have to go to bookstores to get literature, and now we can download anything that's ever been written in the entire history of humanity instantly to nearly any device, and oftentimes for free. We used to have to go to a payphone and input all these digits and try and connect with someone on the other side of the world. And now we can use VoIP technology to contact our friends and family instantly anywhere in the world, oftentimes for free. And you think about music and photography. That word develop pictures is extinct now. And so the point I'm trying to make is that the digital world is part of our DNA. It's part of how we share our experiences, how we consume our entertainment, how we keep in touch with our loved ones. But the financial services industry, in a lot of ways, has not really benefited from technologies yet. And it underpins every aspect of our personal and kind of more globalized lives. And so much of the tools and the technologies that make it possible for banking are actually pretty old. And digital currency technologies and the blockchain really allow us to reimagine a world where we don't have all of this cost and friction, all these intermediaries, and all of these institutions that really exist only because people don't trust each other. And so the question really being posed is, what if software could reliably and faithfully execute a handshake between two people to move value from one place to another without any more centralized entities, without any more Forex markets or banks or merchant processors, just peer-to-peer, in the same way that we can make a Skype call anywhere in the world? Shouldn't we be able to do the same thing to exchange precious information? And so that is what we have been working on in our industry for the past 8 years. And so, from the time that first transaction happened for 2 pizzas through 2010, 2011, some of the early companies were formed in our industry. And then things started to get pretty exciting because you had people that were really passionate about taking a very technical and complicated thing and then hopefully making it easier to use for regular people. And so this is important because a lot of the listeners out there may not really know how email works, and they don't really care. They just know it's a reliable way to have a correspondence with someone anywhere in the world pretty quickly and instantly. And I think that's the kind of expectation we should have with our ability to manage our money in 2017. But it's not. What's really crazy is it can take up to 3 days to make an international wire happen. And that's just inconsistent with what technology is able to do for us today. So when I started thinking and learning more about this technology, I became obsessed with it. And like a lot of people, I had to spend the rest of my life working on that. And so that's how I've ended up where I am.
I love that, though. This is I'm not going to lie to you. This is so fitting because I feel like I'm alone in this world. I'm 36 years old. I should be up with the times and on board with all of this. And I feel so much resistance when it comes to thinking about this. So when you're putting it in terms of, keeping up with the way phone calls are made, the way things are processed, absolutely, that makes perfect sense for me. Where have you been all my life, Nick? This is why I've been needing someone to explain it to me in these terms.
I think I've been flying between airports or too much or something. So it's been a wild ride. Just a few years ago, our company was based in northern England, and we had a small 2-bedroom apartment where everyone was crashed out on the floors, and we ate an overabundance of spaghetti and meatballs while we were working on these things. And then if you fast forward just a couple of years since then, we have offices in New York, in London, and in Luxembourg. We have teammates that have come from the greatest companies in the world, including, Amazon and Apple, the BBC, Google, Goldman Sachs, even NASA. and they've all come here to help us build our business. In fact, we've got individuals from over 18 countries on our team these days. And I think that gets pretty exciting because I've always believed that a diversity of perspectives builds a stronger ecosystem and a stronger kind of team. And we're really thinking about the global impact that this type of technology can have. When we talk about what we're doing here, our mission as a firm is to build an open, fair, and accessible financial future using software. And we want to make it possible for everybody in the world to perform economic transactions with each other instantly and as affordably as possible. And that's a big deal. We want to bring billions of people into the economic sphere of the influence of the internet. And if we do that, we think we can drive incredible prosperity, and we can help basically provide financial services to individuals who've been completely left out from the system for thousands of years. And so, if you look at how we think about, the world maybe a few years over the horizon, we're bringing along a community of people with us. So there are technologists, there are reformed bankers, there are people that have worked in and around Wall Street, but everyone sort of knows that the world could be better. And that's the common mission we have when it comes to building the future of finance.
So Nick, the way you explain it, you make it sound pretty you're able to kind of talk down to the layman and say, this is what really is going on, and this is why this technology needs to keep advancing, and this is why we should all be using this. Do you, you're a CEO of a company, do you find yourself interacting with folks who maybe don't have that, supreme knowledge of Bitcoin and blockchains and things like that? Because it sounds like you kind of can relate to all of the rest of us everyday folks.
Yeah. So, it depends who we're talking to when we're describing how the technology works. But I think the most important thing is that ultimately humans have to interact with the things in order for them to become, ultimately adopted. And so part of the challenge we faced in our industry is that it did come from a very complicated and technical and almost academic origin. But since then, it's inspired a lot more creativity. And here's the neat thing. I think fundamentally, if there's one thing for listeners to take away from this, when people talk about what the blockchain is, here's a quick way to kind of understand it, and maybe it'll help everyone have a little bit of perspective for why this is so interesting. But what we're really talking about is having a worldwide spreadsheet in the cloud. It's a big database that's replicated all over the world, which means it's always staying in a constant state of agreement. This is a really interesting quality that this network has, because in the past, we've always used a centralized record-keeping system. So if you think about it, your bank is basically like a centralized database. It holds track of everything that it knows inside its little walled garden. But if a meteorite hits that bank, or if that bank needs to interact with any other entity, things get really complicated because they aren't always speaking the same language. So if you had a record-keeping system that was global, that everybody could use and write to keep track of who owns what you really have is like a giant global property rights system. And we actually really need this for the age of the internet, so that we can do things like make economic transactions across borders really quickly, or help people make payments for things. But this is really just the beginning. Once you have a big spreadsheet in the cloud that anyone can use and no one can forge and no one can unwind, that's a really key characteristic of this database, is that it's unforgeable. You can do a lot more than just make economic transactions happen on it. So this is where things get a little bit futuristic, but I think it's important to remember just how far we've come in the last 10 years. Remember that a decade ago, the iPhone had not been invented yet. And so if we think about how fast things could go 10 years from now, this is where we can maybe talk a little bit about some science fiction, or what might seem like science fiction, but it's actually right over the horizon. And so what I mean is, imagine a world where you have a lot of devices that are more interconnected. So maybe your home is more online, your refrigerator, and other things. And for example, your refrigerator might actually be able to keep track of all the things that are inside of it, so that if you're starting to run low on milk, or you had a couple buddies over and they drank all your beer the night before, your refrigerator can actually order you more things. So you give your refrigerator a monthly budget. Well, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, your refrigerator will do that, and then a drone will take off from your neighbor's roof where it's been charging on their solar panels and fly off to Amazon where it's going to collect the things that you need to refill your fridge. When it comes back to your house, it drops everything off, and then your refrigerator pays the drone company, pays Amazon, and it also pays the guy's solar power charging station on the rooftop. And that's actually not that crazy of an idea, and it's probably quite likely to happen. In fact, here in the UK, where I am today, Amazon has a drone delivery pilot program that they're running right now. And so what you have with this type of technology is the ability to program your money. And that's really kind of needed. Dollar bills have satisfied kind of an important transition from one economy to a more global one, but it's not really the right one we need for the age of the internet. We need to be able to put conditions on our money so it can do interesting things, like maybe split up into different amounts of pieces, go to certain people we want to pay, or stay locked up for specific amounts of time. And once you have the ability to give your money really specific digital instructions, you can do all kinds of really cool things, like maybe have a refrigerator that can pay for things. So that's kind of maybe what the future could look like just a few years from now. All of those things, though, require us to have a financial fabric for the internet, and that's what blockchain is working towards.
So why Bitcoin? Tell me about your love affair with Bitcoin, and why Bitcoin over some of the other options that are out there?
Yeah, so Bitcoin was really the first sort of successful commercial and widely adopted digital currency, and it still is today. Sometimes the first projects struggle, and sometimes they're the ones that become the most successful due to a variety of conditions. That could be that they're first to market, that they're reliable, that they're perceived to have a lot of stability. So, the Bitcoin community came on the shoulders of some real giants. A lot of the developers that worked for decades putting together the foundational work that was ultimately executed in a new vision in 2009, and which has since been built upon and added on by many, many really brilliant developers and software engineers. So for me, I care more about the use cases than anything, which is getting to a world where we have more interconnected technology for financial infrastructure. But I think Bitcoin is a particularly interesting way of doing that. It reimagines things in a completely new context. And so what we have with Bitcoin is the most reliable implementation of a blockchain technology, period. And it's been running nearly without interruption, 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24/7 for over 8 years now. And that's a feat no back-end banking system can claim. Now, a lot of projects have tried to imitate or replicate the success of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now worth over $20 billion globally. It has a value cap that's greater than that of Twitter. And so obviously when something is successful, a lot of other people try to mimic or imitate it. And there have been lots of attempts. It's really hard to recreate network effects in new projects. And so Bitcoin has been very fortunate to kind of have an early lead. And I think it's hard for these other projects, one, to develop the reputation, to differentiate themselves, and then also to provide a more or better value proposition. And so far, we haven't really seen that happen yet. There are some pretty interesting protocols. There's one called Ethereum that I find really, really compelling, and we're going to watch that with keen interest. Ethereum is basically a vastly more complex version of what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin is exceptionally good at settling and clearing a very limited amount of transactions, but it does it in an incredibly reliable way. Well, Ethereum is based on the same principles as the Bitcoin blockchain. You've got a distributed ledger, you've got nodes, but what's really happening on that network is you actually have an operating system operating on each one of those databases. And so the applications that can be built are far more complex. I think that there's a world where many of these projects can be successful in the sense that we don't just all like one kind of soda. There are many different flavors. And some of those are fit to purpose, and some of them have specific use cases. So some of that's yet to be seen. There's a lot of research that still needs to be done, and there's a lot of work that really still needs to be done to make sure that these technologies can support the kind of scale that is really going to be needed for the financial future. So we're still in a lot of ways in the early days, but we're making very, very great progress. Here at Blockchain, we're working with some of the leading academic institutions in the world to work on that research and development that's very expensive, that takes a long time, but that has the potential to really bring that scale that's needed to bring billions of people onto these networks. I think today we're still a little bit, it's a little too early to do that. So we've kind of almost become a victim of our own success in some ways so far. There are so many people that are already using Bitcoin that it's actually experiencing latency. So just like a highway that has too many cars on it gets a little slow, well, the same thing happens with computer networks. And then you have to either build a bigger highway or rate limit that highway by charging people tolls, or maybe you put two highways on top of each other. And basically the point is that there are different ways of speeding things up and different opinions about how to do that, and that's okay.
Since I have your brain available to me, I'm just gonna go after all the questions that I've ever wanted to know. What are your thoughts on Ethereum? What is your take on it and kind of your gut feeling?
Well, to me, Ethereum is still a really interesting idea that is still trying to find its use case. And so just because you have a blank sheet of paper doesn't necessarily mean that that solves a problem. And so to date, I haven't seen a project gain any type of real user adoption using Ethereum yet. And I think part of that's because it's a deeply complex project, and it's also working through some early reliability issues in the same way that it was difficult to convince people to use Bitcoin 7 or 8 years ago. They're going through some of those growing pains too, and that's to be expected. I think they're waiting to find the right use case that brings on a lot of adoption, but that's one of the ways that happens is by trying a lot of different ideas. And so my point of view is that competition makes for the best outcomes. And no one has a crystal ball. So basically, maybe 20, 30, or 50 years from now, something completely different exists that's far better, that mitigates some of the risks or is more efficient than the things that we're working on today. But the only way we're going to get there is by testing, trying, and constantly improving and competing with the best ideas in the world. So, I think Ethereum's a neat project, and I know a lot of the guys working there, and I like the community a lot. So, looking forward to seeing them get some wins.
And really one of the hugest questions of all, of course, would be, where do you see this technology, the blockchain and Bitcoin and all of these cryptocurrencies in this world you live in? Where do you see it? And give me a projection for 10 years from now. Pull that crystal ball back out.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, disclaimer, I've never, ever gotten one of these predictions right. So everyone should take this with a grain of salt. My point of view is that the digital world is going to get integrated into finance in a really deep and really fundamental way. And I think it's inevitable that technologies like blockchain technology